The candidates for the U.S. presidency have been making their final pitches of the campaign in key swing states. Vice President Kamala Harris, the Democratic candidate, held her last rally in Pennsylvania. Tens of thousands of supporters gathered outside the Philadelphia Museum of Art for a star-studded concert featuring Lady Gaga and Katy Perry, among others. Republican candidate, former President Donald Trump, held a rally in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, before heading to Grand Rapids in Michigan, another battleground state, where he is right now giving his final address to supporters. And with polls about to open, it's now down to U.S. voters to choose the political direction of their country for the next 4 years.
Are we ready to do this?
The drive to get voters to the polls did not let up until the final moment. Vice President Kamala Harris fired up a crowd in Pennsylvania as Election Day neared.
But what you all are signing up to do today and what you've been doing, let's enjoy it. You know, and I know you do. I can feel the mood in here because it's the best of who we are as a democracy.
Her rival Donald Trump also marked Election Eve with a competing rally in Pennsylvania.
You built this country, I have to tell you, you built this country. You're going to save this country, too. You're going to save it. Because, you know, if we win Pennsylvania, not me, if we win Pennsylvania, we win the whole ball of wax. It's over.
Back in D.C., Howard University prepares to host Harris on election night, where she will wait for the results.
It means a lot because it's just super inspiring to us as students to see what we can become, because this is her alma mater, and also to see that she hasn't forgotten where she's come from.
Her being a black woman president would be monumental, not only for Howard but for the country as well, and I'm really looking forward to it.
As preparations unfolded in D.C., security ramped up in Florida near Mar-a-Lago, where Trump will await results on election night. His supporters were out on the streets marking Election Eve.
We're here to support Donald J. Trump, so we're here, ready to go.
The economy is terrible right now. We have an immigration crisis going on, and me personally, I don't think we can afford to live another 4 years under the current administration.
With the final hours ticking down, the outcome now rests with the voters.
We're now joined by political analyst Liz Schulke in Baltimore, Maryland. Liz, how would you sum up what Kamala Harris's pitch to voters has been through this entire campaign?
Throughout the entire campaign, her pitch has been, in part, a rebuttal to Trump, saying one of her most famous taglines is, "We will not go back," reminding people of the dangers and the wreck that she sees that it caused the first Trump administration, but decidedly different from Biden and, in general, any other candidate. Her message has been one of joy. You heard that just in the clip. Let's enjoy this. And I think she tapped into an ethos that the country was feeling in general this summer with concerts in the Olympics and now her campaign of a need to feel joyful about civic participation again.
But is the country necessarily feeling joyful? I mean, some of the issues that keep coming up are the cost of living and immigration, for instance.
Absolutely, and I think that's what you hear in the Trump campaign. He's really driving home how horrible everything is. He's talking about how things are ruined, how cities are bad, how you can't afford to live. And that's a very real feeling in America as well. We have come out of the pandemic with inflation that's finally getting under control, but folks are still feeling it at the grocery store. And so it is very much an antithesis to the Harris campaign of things are really bad and people are struggling. And I think it leaves the American people feeling both ways and a lot of anxiety.
Is this a clash of policy versus perception, and perception ultimately being slightly hard to ignore?
I would say that's the defining feature of the entire Biden administration, is that he has had a very effective and good presidency for Americans' bottom line. It's one of the only countries that avoided a recession after the pandemic. Jobs are up, inflation is down, and yet people just don't feel it. And whether that's because it always takes a little while for the policy that data scientists are seeing to feel it in our pocket, or if it's this rhetoric that we see online about how divided we are and how Americans have never felt more fear and anger in their political system.
That doesn't sound like very good news for Kamala Harris.
I think she's also tapping into, of course, there's anger. I think there's a lot of women that are also feeling like, we can't risk our lives with another Trump presidency. There's a lot of anger in minority communities about some of the language that Trump has used. I think on the whole, it's not good for America, but I do think her shift to joy will do her well on Election Day because people want to vote for something, not just against something.
Speaking of voting, more than 80 million people have already cast their ballots. Does this early voting give us any clues as to what we can expect on Election Day?
Yes and no. It's hard to compare it to the last election because it was the pandemic election. And so early voting and mail-in voting was kind of the main way to do it. That said, based on historical trends, early voting tends to favor Democrats because they have a ground game. With that said, right now, just Democrats, Republicans. Democrats are leading in swing states, but by a smaller margin than they did in 2020. So that is a sign that would give the campaign pause, except exit polling from these have said that Harris is leading. So we can dice that a lot of ways and say maybe people aren't voting straight party in this early mail-in voting. There's a lot of trying to read the tea leaves right now about what this early voting means.
Now, polls also indicate that this is a very close race. How could the turnout patterns on voting day still affect the final result?
I think that's, to quote Trump, the whole ball of wax. It's going to be, can you get every last supporter that is on your side to the doors, to the polls, because it will be all about turnout, and it'll be about Democrats maintaining that smaller margin that they've already established in the early voting and Trump's team overtaking it. So it'll be about, in Pennsylvania in 2020, it came down to 80,000 votes. And in 2016, it came down to 40,000 votes. And that is an incredibly small margin that we can expect again tomorrow.
We'll leave it there for the moment, but thanks so much for your time today. Political analyst Liz Chulka speaking to us from Baltimore. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Well, DW's chief international editor Richard Walker is in Florida, in Palm Beach, in fact, where Donald Trump will hold his election night party. I asked him earlier if either candidate had more momentum entering Election Day.
Yeah, so Stephen, I'm just going to explain a little bit, first of all, where we are. So yeah, we're in Palm Beach, and we've come to a flag waving, and as you can see, everybody's got their flags out. This is for the local Republican Party group in this town, have come down to this intersection to show their support for Donald Trump. And you can hear the honking of car horns in the background. They've definitely been getting a lot of support from a lot of the cars driving past here. One car even circling around twice to keep honking his horn further. So a lot of enthusiasm on this very street corner for Donald Trump. And if you look back this way, 5 minutes drive just down there is Mar-a-Lago. That is Donald Trump's famous club where he will be holding his own celebration tomorrow, what he hopes will be a celebration on election night. So talking to the people here, these Trump supporters, of course, they say that momentum is on Trump's side. Certainly you've seen in the last couple of weeks that the polls have been narrowing, with Trump catching up on a national level with Kamala Harris and overtaking her in some polls, and a similar picture in some of the swing states. But it's still extremely close, and the pollsters really do say that they simply do not know who is going to win this election. It could be very, very close indeed. There have been a couple of glimmers of hope for Harris over the weekend in terms of polls coming out in the state of Iowa, and some polling in some of the southern of the swing states where she had been looking to be quite far behind, perhaps has caught up a little bit. But we're really, in the terms of the polling, very much within what you call the margin of error, where the pollsters say, look, we simply do not know. And I think talking to the people here, of course, you know, they want to say they're optimistic for Donald Trump, but they also acknowledge they don't know who's going to win tomorrow.
And Richard, what muddies that picture further is that we know that about a third of eligible voters have already cast their ballots. Does that early voting data give us any clues about what we could see on Tuesday?
Yeah, I mean, even there, I think it's pretty hard to find clues. I mean, these numbers differ from state to state. So here in Florida, in fact, something like 2/3 of people have already voted. So a huge amount of early voting taking place here. According to numbers that were published in the local media over the weekend, it looked like those who were registered as Republicans had come out in early voting somewhat more than those who were registered as Democrats. In other states, the picture may be the other way around. But those watching the polls really caution against reading too much into early voting data, that there are not particularly good comparisons in terms of other elections. For instance, the last election, it was tail end of the pandemic, of course, or rather kind of heading right in the midst of the pandemic, and that was, of course, quite a sort of distorting situation in terms of who would go to early voting or not, particularly because also Donald Trump was very skeptical about early voting at that point. He is no longer skeptical about it. So I think overall we shouldn't read too much into these numbers, but it is interesting that early voting is certainly a big deal. More than half of the people here in this state have already voted. So Election Day is no longer quite Election Day in the sense that it once was.
Well, Richard, we see how much passion there is on the street behind you there. Given how close this race is it possible that we might not actually have a clear winner by the end of Tuesday? And how is that likely to come out on the streets and with supporters on both sides?
Yeah, so, I mean, that is certainly a possibility that people talk about, that there will not be clarity during the course of Tuesday night. And, of course, the longer it takes for a result to be arrived at, the greater the scope there is for results to be challenged, for legal processes, and for even the prospect of possible unrest, as, of course, we saw back in 2020. So this is definitely a scenario that people are bracing for.
All right, DW Chief International Editor Richard Walker there in Palm Beach, Florida. Thank you.